Good afternoon. And thank you for coming today to the Women's Studies, Gender Studies 35th Anniversary Celebration. My name is Scott Morganson. I'm an associate professor in the Gender Studies Department, and I'm very happy to be here to introduce the first formal speaker of our event. Gunanshuni Janice Hill is Turtle Clan, a clan mother of the Mohawk Nation from Tyendinaga Mohawk Territory, and Associate Vice Principal, Indigenous Initiatives and Reconciliation at Queen's. She began her academic career as an adjunct faculty member in the Queen's University Faculty of Education, where she went on to help establish ATEP, the Aboriginal Teacher Education Program, serving as academic co-director for the program in 1997 to 98. For 7 years, she served as director of the Four Directions Indigenous Student Center prior to being appointed director of the Office of Indigenous Initiatives, where she provides university-wide leadership, overseeing and supporting the implementation of the Queen's TRC Task Force Report recommendations. Jan has been a friend of and a participant in the Department of Gender Studies for many years. In addition to offering her service to department committees, she is a member of the Gender Studies MA program, and she's completing her master's thesis on the subject of gender in the Longhouse community. Readers of her work will witness her deeply reflexive accounts of Haudenosaunee teachings in conversation with Longhouse community members, through which she models research with, for, and within community. We in Gender Studies know well her sustained commitments to promoting community care and social justice at Queen's, and our department is committed to supporting her leadership. Please join me in warmly welcoming Gunanshuni Jan Hill, who will now provide a formal welcome to today's event.
Nyawagoa, thank you so very much for that kind and auspicious introduction, Scott. I appreciate it so very much. Skanagoa sewa gwego, peace and greetings to everyone. Kunjokwa sawadahusiyos kanikariwesa. De chidawanu horado ne sungwaya dison. Ne wahi rosa año, ne gadi, ne ohandugari wadekwa, ungawana headstone. Ona sawadahusiyos kunjokwa ne egadi ohandugari wadekwa ungadi wanungode. Please lend me your ears for a few minutes as we gather our minds together to offer the words that come before all others, and offer our greetings and thanks to the Creator and all things in the natural world, as I have been taught to do and is the custom of my people, the Haudenosaunee. This is what we have been instructed to do before any business shall come to pass, where 2 or more people have gathered. And I'm so very happy to see way more than 2 people gathered here this evening. Agwego unska, andiduat wait nuni, ne ungwat nigura, dano dea tinowarado, ne agwego yunki, yenawase, gio and jade. We gather our minds together and offer our greetings and thanks to all the things on the earth, all the green and growing things, the medicines, foods, plants, trees, shrubs, and grasses, the waters and the life within the waters, and to our relatives, the animals. Agwego unska, andiduat wait nuni, ne ungwat nigura, dano dea tinowarado, ne agwego yunki yenawase, jit karunyade. We gather our minds together and offer our greetings and thanks to all the things in the sky, the birds who sing their beautiful songs, the winds that come from the 4 directions, our elder brother, the sun, our grandmother, the moon, our grandfathers, the thunder beings, and the stars in the heavens. Dana onagadi agwego de chidawanu horado ne sungwayat disong. And finally, we offer our choicest greetings and thanks to Sungwayat Disong, the creator of all things. It's not my intention to have missed anything. If I have, I ask each of you to make it right in your own hearts and minds. To neoduhak nezewat nigora. And so now the words that come before all others have been said, and we can all focus on the reason we've gathered here today. Today is a time of celebration, of reflection, of giving thanks, and of planning and looking to the future. Reflecting on where we have come from and planning for the future sometimes requires that we revisit a difficult past, especially for spaces like women's studies and gender studies, in a world largely influenced and informed by patriarchy, racism, colonization, and heteronormativity. Creating safe spaces for intellectual, emotional, spiritual, and physical exploration that speaks against these things is enormous, but can be accomplished as evidenced by this celebration. At this time, it's my practice to advise that if any of you are carrying burdens, I invite you to set them aside for the time we've gathered. Be here, be present. You may choose to pick them back up when we're finished, but I suggest leaving them for Creator to take care of. Today, I would also like to acknowledge the sacred land Queen's University stands on, which has been the site of human activity for many hundreds of thousands of years. As I understand it, this territory is included in the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes, to ensure that there will be food and resources for generations yet to come. 7 generations into the future, we're taught. We acknowledge and thank our ancestors for continuing to live in a way that ensures we remember these agreements and responsibilities. Wat kwanuharadu, kanushuni yungyats, Garakwine, Catherine Brandt Gunha yun dudjets, ne agate nistoha, Dono Lennox Hill Gunha rum Wyatts, ne rugate niha, wage nyatu, wage ganyung gehaga, ni wagwan hoju, Gundegi Nidawagenu, Gundege Gunagari. Welcome. As you heard from Scott, Ganushuni is what they call me. She is making a house. My traditional name, chosen for me by my sisters in consultation with a Turtle Clan mother. My deceased mother is Catherine Brandt, and my deceased father is Lennox Hill. He was Wolf Clan. I'm Turtle Clan, as you heard from the Mohawk Nation. I'm from Gundege, and that is where I live. In a more formal introduction, I would continue on to tell you about my family, my children, my grandchildren, and who my grandparents are, and so on. For today, I will share that both of my parents and all of my grandparents, at least six generations back, are Ganyunk Gehaga. I can trace my ancestry back to 1784, when my ancestors, the Mohawks of Fort Hunter from the Mohawk Valley in Upper New York State, arrived at our resettlement at the Bay of Quinte in Ontario. This was a direct result of the American Revolution and the signing of the Treaty of Paris, which prompted our forcible removal from our traditional homelands. It's customary and respectful that before I address a group, I place myself in relation to who I am within my family, my clan, and my nation. It's important that I position myself so that you know where I am speaking from, what informs me, and where I am in relation to you and to the land. It's important to pay respect to ancestral and traditional lands and territories and local Indigenous communities. By doing so, we honor our Indigenous ancestors and the current stewards of the land and speak to our personal, spiritual, political, and social relationships with the land. To be meaningful and respectful, a territorial acknowledgement needs to be intentional. This is a time to give thanks. Consider our individual and collective role in the stewardship of Mother Earth and in building relationships between Indigenous peoples and communities and the rest of the country. As a Mohawk woman tied to this land, it is customary for me to offer a welcome to territory versus a land acknowledgement because this is my homeland. I am also a clan mother, as you heard, in our Longhouse community at Gundege. And so as such, on behalf of the women, men, children, faith keepers, and leadership of our Longhouse, I welcome you. I would encourage all of you to consider the land you stand on today. What is your relationship to it and to the original inhabitants? As you also heard from Scott, I'm the Associate Vice Principal, Indigenous Initiatives and Reconciliation at Queen's. It's my responsibility to work towards the implementation of the recommendations from our TRC Task Force report and to encourage further work on decolonization, indigenization, and reconciliation across our campuses and with our community partners. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you, and I look forward to listening, learning, meeting new people, and being challenged in my thinking today, and of course, to celebrating this amazing achievement. Nyawat Giwahi, I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Jan, for opening our event in a good way. Niowen. Many of us gathered here today are in Kingston, Cataraqui, and most of us are uninvited guests on this traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples who have lived here since time immemorial. We are grateful to the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples for their generous hospitality, and we recognize that as guests here, we have responsibilities to our hosts and to care for each other and for the land. Welcome, everyone. My name is Elaine Power. I'm the current head of Gender Studies, and I'm so grateful that you joined us today as we celebrate the 35th anniversary of the founding of Women's Studies, Gender Studies at Queen's. As you probably know, the first Women's Studies course was offered in September 1986, but it didn't happen magically. It took the struggles of many to birth Women's Studies at Queen's. Today, we honor those who engaged in that struggle, in the words of a 1983 report to the principal, to correct the androcentric bias in theory and research in all areas of the university. As you will hear today, many women found solidarity and much needed support in the community of women who founded the program and the department at a time when women faculty were still a rarity at Queen's. And yet we also recognize that not all found community and support in women's gender studies. While the invitation to join today's celebration was met with delight by most, some wrote back with stories of pain and exclusion. Our colleagues have pushed the department to become more inclusive, to engage in scholarship, teaching, and activism that recognizes multiple and intersecting axes of oppression and encourages complex, non-binary ways of thinking about gender, sexuality, race, religion, ability, class, health, and much more. Just yesterday, we mourned the loss of George Floyd, who was brutally murdered by police in Minneapolis a year ago. If we're going to go forward in a good way, we need to remember that in the words of Alexia Garza, co-creator of the Black Lives Matter movement, if any of us are left behind, we have failed. Today, we celebrate those in the women's gender studies community working towards justice and liberation. We have a packed and fun program that includes remarks from the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science and remarks from some of the founding members of women's gender studies. We have creative contributions from past and present students and a video wall featuring videos of many of our community members expressing what women's and gender studies means to them. Margaret Little will present a brief summary of the oral history interviews that she and Nancy Butler have conducted with founders of the department. We have a formal program that will last about 30 minutes, and then we'll take a short 5-minute break. And for those who wish to return for the more informal part, we have an open mic time where everyone who wishes to can speak and reminisce, and we hope you'll join us for that. Just before I pass things over to the Dean for her opening remarks, please note that this event is being recorded. And please also remember that the chat is public. If you need closed captioning, it is available on Zoom by clicking on the live transcript on the bottom of your Zoom screen. I sincerely thank all those who contributed to today's event, especially faculty member Margaret Little, department manager Danita Arthurs, video editor Emily Joyce, and Scott Fitzpatrick from Collective Broadcast. And thank you all for joining us. Now it gives me pleasure to introduce our Dean, Barbara Crowe, who was appointed Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Science in 2017. Dean Crowe has extensive experience in the development of gender studies in Canada. She was one of the first graduates of women's studies from York University and served as a graduate representative to develop a graduate program at York, now one of the largest in the country. Dean Crowe has served as president of the Canadian Women's Studies Association, where she more than tripled its membership and made CWSA one of the first academic associations to have a web presence. She edited one of the definitive collections on US radical feminism, co-edited with one of her closest friends, Dr. Lise Gotell. Together, they also co-edited the Gender Studies introductory text with the highest circulation from 2000 to 2010. Dean Crowe also delivered one of the first courses in North America on race and digital technologies. Please join me in welcoming her.
Great, thank you very much, Elaine. Rise up, rise up. Elaine and I were talking, Margaret Little and I were talking about how many times we had been to marches with that music. And thank you, Danita Arthurs and Scott Fitzpatrick, for your technical support today. So I'm here to do a formal welcome on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Science. But first, I thought it was really important from your introduction to see what a significant role for my own personal and professional life gender studies has played, and how it shaped my politics, and in particular, many of the Queen's scholars and many of the events that happened at Queen's in the 80s played in a significant role. And also many academic administrators have gender or women's studies degrees. So there's ways in which the degree has manifested itself in different ways. So on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and Science, welcome to the many individuals who have and continue to shape and contribute to gender studies at Queen's. This shaping and these contributions have not only been significant in terms of the research and scholarship and what many of the students have been able to do and take up with their degrees, but also its important role in advocacy and leadership on many campus issues and policies. And certainly Professor Mckittrick will talk about some of that later today. Thousands of students have taken gender study courses from Queen's in the last 3 decades. And this morning I met with the Queen's alumni and said, oh, this afternoon I'm going to 35 years at Queen's. And she said, Barbara, you need to know that I took a course on the body and sexuality. It had a profound impact on me. And as a result, she spent the last 2 decades being an advocate for young girls. So Farah Mohammed, who organized the G20 Summit on Girls, and just recently finished being a CEO of the Malala Fund. And she said it was that course that really helped her understand and pave her way to the kind of work that she's doing today. So while a small program, its reach has been integral and certainly a significant part of the fabric of Queen's. So I'd like to thank the students, the staff, the faculty, the alumni, and the community for your contributions. And I hope you enjoy this incredible celebration of the past, how it's shaping moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Next we have the first of 3 short videos created by current and former students. The first one is from Marcus Harwood Jones, who is an author, a visual artist, and an academic based in Toronto. He's the author of 4 novels and numerous other creative works. Marcus holds a BA in sociology from Ryerson University, an MA in gender studies from Queen's, and is currently a doctoral student in gender studies. And I found his video incredibly moving. I think all of you will too. Thank you, Marcus.
When I was offered acceptance to the master's program for gender studies at Queen's, I wasn't sure I would accept. I wasn't sure about moving to Kingston. I had spent the last several years of my life building up a home in Toronto. My partner was there, all my friends, all the communities that I'd organized with over the years. And when I took the train in the early morning to go out to Kingston, I thought, well, we'll see how this goes. When I got to the train station, a woman with beautiful purple hair and a sparkly outfit came and introduced herself as Terry. She said she was there to pick me up. I got into a car with her and 2 women who I would later find out to be Trish and Catherine. The 2 of them were honest and caring and thoughtful with their responses to my questions. And throughout the course of that ride from the train station to the campus, I realized that this could be a home for me. After a tour of the gender studies program, by the time I went home that evening, I called my partner from the train and said, I think I have to move to Kingston. It was one of the best choices I made. I connected with an incredible roommate, rented this lovely house where I could have people over, made incredible connections, not just in gender studies, but in cultural studies and all across the university. I participated in actions on campus, went to community meetings, hosted a book launch, and of course got my degree. So when I got accepted to the PhD program, there was no question. And this time I decided to commute from Toronto. And I have these lovely memories of coming in on Sunday nights and my colleague's apartment where they graciously let me sleep on an air mattress so that I could go to my classes the next day. Attending classes sometimes 1 or 2 days and then commuting home again. I was splitting my life. And around the beginning of March 2020, I had just done about 2 or 3 days in Kingston, very early mornings, late nights, trying to keep up with my homework and my readings and my TA work. And I remember looking up and seeing the sun setting over the horizon and just thinking how beautiful it was and how lucky I was to be there to witness that. And then I looked back down at my laptop and had a quiet thought to myself that said, I should stop and appreciate that sunset more. And then a second thought followed that said, no, I'll see it again next week when I take the train. As I sit here in spring 2021, that memory still remains crystal clear. Sitting on a train from Kingston to Toronto, buzzing with exhaustion and excitement and curiosity, my bag full of textbooks and my computer full of different tabs and documents, my heart warm even as we now log in through our computers. I treasure those relationships that I made, and I'm in awe of how they've persisted. So, thank you to Gender Studies for connecting me with some of my closest friends, some of the most important authors I've ever read, and helping expand everything that I thought could be possible for me and for so many people. Thank you.
Wow, that was just amazing. Thank you, Marcus, so much. I'm Margaret Little, and I want to recognize again the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, the stolen land of theirs that Gender Studies has sat on for 35 years. I will remain always grateful. This is a very brief history I'm doing from some preliminary oral history interviews and Nancy Butler and I have done. Kudos to Nancy for suggesting the idea. We've interviewed former students of gender studies, former faculty and current faculty, and also former and staff in gender studies. And so this is just a beginning based on those interviews. Also, at the same time, I started to have conversations with people who are no longer in gender studies, but have many memories, some of them quite difficult, and they shared them with me about why they may not be attending today. So I also wanted to have them in my mind and in the room as we have this celebration. What became clear is there are multiple histories, multiple stories connected to gender studies here at Queen's. One story that everyone spoke to is what an ambitious project gender studies has always been, and how it's always been run on such few resources. It's always been underfunded every step of the way. So I want to recognize the fact that many, many people have given enormous time and enormous effort to make gender studies happen from the very beginning to today, and often without inadequate compensation or recognition. I want to recognize each and every one of you who are taking part, who are attending today, because I know, I've looked at the list, I know that all of you have helped shape who we are today. So I want to thank you for all your engagement with us. All right, so let's start with the Seeds of Gender Studies, the report of the Principals Advisory Review Committee on the Status of Women at Queen's in May 1983. Well, it actually started before that with a brainstorming session at the Banry Center, which is the center to support mature women at Queen's. It's the only one of its kind in Canada, actually. And there was a discussion there, and they decided that Elizabeth Green, who was in the English department, would spearhead the possibility of gender studies at Queen's. She was one of the few people in that room who had tenure at the time, so she became the obvious choice. So the subcommittee worked bloody hard to try and convince Queen's that we needed a gender studies program. They surveyed all of Queen's and found that there were 5 whole courses that dealt primarily with women in the entire university, 5. They also looked at other universities and found that York, U of T, McGill, Ottawa U had double or triple that number of courses. They reminded Queen's that Queen's had the record of one of the worst in Canada for its low female tenured faculty. They got the library involved and created a bibliography to support these 5 courses for students to enrich their education in them. And they made brochures of the 5 courses as well as the bibliographies. And they made sure that this brochure went in every single student's orientation package. I think that was kind of brilliant, actually. Those brochures also went to every dean across the university, every head of department across the university, and every academic advisor. So they just spread the word out. They created a survey to measure student interest because, of course, the opponents said there was no interest. They invited academics from other universities who already had a women's studies program to come to Queen's, give workshops, and help them brainstorm on how to create women's studies here at Queen's. They solicited and heard complaints from students who were refused by their departments to take these 5 courses at Queen's, and also students who were not allowed to write on feminist topics in their departments. And I was one of those. Anyways, and as well, they organized with the students a petition. And Becky Ross, one of the people we interviewed, was an MA student at the time, and she remembers having a booth at orientation week to get people to sign up. Over 580 signatures came out of that petition. So I wanted to acknowledge the magnitude of the invisible work that people did without compensation in those early days to try to create the possibility of a gender studies program here at Queen's. And so they started with a course. So the first course, here are the people that were involved in teaching it. We had 2 poorly paid coordinators, Elizabeth Green and Catherine McKenna. And then we had a number of other people from various faculty that taught one night of the course. Most of these people who taught were not tenured, so they didn't have job security. And there also was a community activist, Brahman Wallace, who was a poet, filmmaker, newspaper columnist, and she also was very involved in teaching the first course. And in that course, everybody came from their different disciplines or their activism, and they just blew up the discipline they came from by asking completely different questions that were outside of the discipline. So here's now a photo of this first course. And it was launched in the fall of 1985, Wednesday nights, 7 to 10 p.m. at Botterill Hall. And I was one of the lucky students. I was an MA student at the time and a community activist, and I was sitting in the back row somewhere there. There were over 100 students who were officially enrolled in the course. There were 30 official auditors, and there were another 20 of us who were graduate students on campus or community activists who came and sat at the back of the room and came every single week and listened to every word that the people had to say. You'll notice if you look at the photo closely that it is a sea of white faces, but it's also a sea of faces that are not your typical 18-year-old Queen's student, that there were a lot of people from the community. There's a mom with a small baby. Georgette Fry is there, a now international renowned blues singer. Just amazing community people were enrolled in this course. All right, the course was more than just a course. It really was a white feminist community event that happened weekly. All right, so shortly after the first course, Roberta Hamilton was convinced to become the first director, and Roberta persuaded Terry Sheen to be part of the adventure of becoming the first staff. And with very limited money or people, they soon developed a full undergraduate program. They succeeded, even though opponents at the time said this was a flash in the pan, that this was not a discipline. I want to take a moment through this slide to acknowledge these are, as far as I know, all the people that have taught a course in gender studies in our 35 years. And if you count them up, there's over 80 people in this slide. This is not including anyone who taught cross-listed courses and invited gender studies students into their cross-listed courses. This is also not including the teaching assistants who taught for us and have been on, really bore the brunt of resistance to students exploring privilege and oppression. I want to now acknowledge the staff that we've had. We've had amazing staff, and they have been on the front line of dealing with all the challenges that gender studies brings. They've dealt with death threats and graffiti, and including the smearing of feces against their office doors. That happened only 6 years ago. They always had a box of Kleenex in their office in order to console students, staff, faculty of various challenges that we would have. I want to think about what gender studies challenged in those early years, because it challenged a lot about the Queen's way of doing things. First, it challenged that a course could include all the disciplines. There was no course like that at Queen's. And we can move to the next slide, I think, for this. It challenged, it challenged the fact that sciences, humanities, arts, social sciences, nursing, law, medicine could all be part of a course. That had not been seen before. It challenged the hierarchical leadership of the university as well. We had co-coordinators of the early intro courses. We also had co-directors or co-coordinators of the entire program. Bev Baines and Roberta Lamb, who we interviewed, spoke to that and how that ruffled the administration. We also had a different way of thinking about staff. That staff, as Terry Eastersheen told us, was involved in shaping the department, in making decisions about the department, in representing the department to university committees all over the campus, and to having voting rights on various committees within the department. So a very different idea. It also challenged the town gown split. As you saw from the first course photo, community people were very involved in shaping the original course and the original program. As well, they were very involved as students in the program. They were involved as instructors in the program. I just met someone the other day, a neighbor of mine, who said, oh yeah, I taught in that course. And she's, a queer medical doctor who was also a community activist and spoke in the course. So there's lots of people that I don't even know of who played a significant role in the beginning of gender studies. I also want to recognize the heads of our department. We have been so fortunate to have them steer the ship through all the challenges, be they budgetary, racism, colonialism, homophobia, transphobia, you name it. Gender studies has had to deal with it. And these heads have had to do battle for us on so many occasions. And they've been amazing. So I really want to thank all of them. As we celebrate, I want us to reflect on what is remembered and what is forgotten. What is remembered seems clear that for some, mainly white women, gender studies was a refuge from their departments who were often hostile to them. And the word refuge came up several times in the interviews. But what is also forgotten is that Black, Indigenous people of color often did not find gender studies a refuge. And in fact, we also found through the interviews that gender studies was sometimes an environment that was poisonous for them to survive. And we had a revolving door of people leaving because it was untenable. And again, the Henry Report and all other since diversity and equity reports explain this well. A second group that was sometimes forgotten is the sessionals. Because we've had such a minuscule budget all the way along, we've relied on sessionals more than most departments do. And as we all know, this is exploitative labor that sessionals perform for us regularly and throughout the entire history. They give their lifeblood to us. And in return, we are unfortunately unable to give them job security. So as we remember all of this, we need to think about how do we look and plan for a future where we can make a better story, a story that attempts to fundamentally dismantle racism and colonialism, homophobia and transphobia, ableism, and so much more. The challenge is, I think, even more important when we situate the celebration today with the anniversary of George Floyd's brutal murder, and also when we situate this celebration in the fact that so many people have died during the global pandemic, and disproportionately Black, Indigenous, and people of color, both here in Canada and around the world. Given all this, gender studies remains a very ambitious project, and there is a continued call for liberation for all that gender studies can embrace. So let's rise up for 35 more years. Thanks.
Thanks, Margaret. At least 35 more. Thanks so much. And we'll be hearing shortly from some of the founders of the program and the department. But before we move to that section, we have another creative video by a current student, Catherine Masrick. Catherine is a graduate from the first master's cohort in gender studies and is currently a doctoral student. She also holds a dance teaching diploma from the Royal Academy of Dance in London, England. Her research considers critical theory in relation to ballet and emergent praxis of dance education. Thank you so much for your video, Catherine.
My name is Catherine Masrick. I'm a third-year PhD student in the Department of Gender Studies. I'm a graduate from the first cohort of the master's program. I also was a dancer. For over 2 decades, I have, alongside my academic pursuits, worked as a dance educator. It wasn't until gender studies and Kingston that I finally understood how these two paths could converge. Ballet has a complicated history, descended from the royal courts and evolving alongside contemporary aesthetics. The list of who ballet leaves out is longer than who it includes, but it doesn't have to be that way. I teach students of all ages and abilities, from toddlers to retired adults. I have taught students who have gone on to successful professional dance careers, as well as students who have taken a variety of life and career journeys. I stage adapted traditional works as well as mounting new choreographies. I want to instill in students that art in general, and dance or ballet in particular, is a powerful storytelling tool. The move to transition from telling other people's stories to their own follows them as the dancers develop cognitively, artistically, and technically. While I have won awards for my choreography on various different stages, one of my proudest accomplishments was seeing 3 of the students I've taught take matters into their own hands. At the repeal of the new sexual education curriculum in 2018, these 3 young people organized, choreographed, and disseminated on social media a protest dance because, they explained, dance was their art, and this was how they had to make their voices heard. Gender studies has shaped who I am as a dance educator. It has helped me to see how to put students first and teach them about the powerful storytelling tools ballet holds, rather than seeing it as an archaic set of practices rigidly tied to an unrealistic aesthetic. For this, I am eternally grateful, as I can better serve my community and help to influence the artists and youth of tomorrow.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you, Catherine. Oh, you know, you're also creative. It just, it's amazing. All right, now we are moving on to the founding. We have convinced some of the founding members of the gender studies to come forward and be part of a panel. So will all of those people please bring your video cameras on, and we will get ready. You know, I will introduce them in the chronicle order of when they joined gender studies. And I didn't ask them how they wanted to be introduced because I wanted to say what I wanted to say. So here we go. So first of all, Elizabeth Green, in what I said in my presentation, was asked to lead the group that was having this discussion in the Ban Re Center. So she gathered people together. She had tenure at the time in the English department. She was a medievalist scholar, and she taught in the English department for many years. She created courses like Selected Women's Writers Course, Canadian Women Writers Course. You know, the English department would not have thought of any of those ideas on their own. Elizabeth is also an award-winning poet and an author, and she has been a long-time board member of the Ban Re Center. And in fact, she is a good sport. She even convinced to pose nude to fundraise for the Ban Re Center. And she has been a mentor to many young writers and to many young feminist academics. So with that, I introduce Elizabeth.
Oh, Margaret, thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. And this is such a wonderful event. I'm so thrilled to be part of it. And when we gathered in the Ban Re Center, then Foundation, in the summer of 1983, we could never have imagined that this would happen in 35 years. I'm just thrilled to be here. And a lot of what I'm going to say is what you said in the history, but I wanted to make sure that I gave a shout out to the Women's Studies Subcommittee, which was such a wonderful committee. And we were Change the Recipe feminists rather than Piece of the Pie feminists. We always started with a check-in. We always sat around in a circle. Everyone had an equal voice, and it sounds as if this has carried over into gender studies since, which is wonderful. So we were pulling women's studies basically out of thin air. I mean, it was a twinkle in a few people's eyes. So we started by looking at reading lists and documenting the need for women's studies by seeing how much of the curriculum was male, and most of it was. Then we tried to raise the profile of women's studies. And the committee was great at that, especially the students on the committee. It seemed as if 100 advocates for women's studies had landed at Queen's, although there were only 8 or 10 of us in the circle, and not everybody was out there advocating. But those who did really did, and did it with great energy. Suzanne Williams, our amazing SWEP students who had been hired by Mary Maxwell before she went on sabbatical, created the flyer that you talked about that listed resources for women's studies at Queen's. And I remember there only being components of courses rather than women's studies courses. But this definitely raised the profile of women's studies at Queen's, and there were bios of the instructors who taught in those courses and taught those courses, and that also raised the profile of women at Queen's, which was necessary then because there weren't so many women and they tended to be marginal. We tended to be marginalized. I felt I should mention that both Joan Sherwood and I felt we needed support from outside our departments to get our courses through them. Joan Sherwood wanted to teach a a course in history of the family, which she had super prepared. I've never seen a course so prepared, but she still felt that she needed support. And my course on selected women writers, or my courses on selected women writers from Julian of Norwich to Brahman Wallace, was not as prepared, but I still felt that I needed supporting letters. I think I got about 6. And one of my colleagues objected that it was a bird course, but let it through, or they let it through. But I don't think it would have happened without those supporting letters. I'm really glad to see that Becky Ross is here. She was such a mainstay of the committee, and she and Jane Haddad organized the Women's Studies table during orientation week and collected all those signatures on that very bulky petition. I think by the time it was completed, there were over 700 signatures, but we kept collecting signatures after the tables. We were having people sign indicating their interest in women's studies and their interest in an introductory multidisciplinary women's studies course at Queen's, which was our first goal. So by the time that happened, we only had to assemble a course and get it through faculty board, and then our work was done in 1985. So thank you first to the amazing committee. It's one of the very best committees I've ever been on. And thank you, Margaret, for your introduction, your work on women's studies. You've been there practically from the first. Thanks to everyone who has made women's studies and gender studies so flourishing and so full of energy and growing beyond our wildest dreams, except that we didn't put a lid on our dreams. So it's thrilling to be here, and wishing gender studies many happy returns of the day and continued growth and flourishing and making a difference to faculty, students, the university, the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You were there at the beginning. And next on the scene was Roberta Hamilton. She was cajoled, as I understand it, by women faculty and by the deanery to become the first director of women's studies in 1986. And Roberta had just come to Queen's as a Webster Fellow, and I was lucky enough as a student to be at that Webster lecture, and I will never forget it. Roberta in her little jumper and her Mary Jane shoes and her very beguiling smile, but then she blew apart the discipline of history to all these people in tweed jackets in the room. It was really it was really quite a moment I won't forget. And she would never tell you this, but she is the author of some path-breaking books on history and on feminist theory and sociology. For instance, her book on gendering the vertical mosaic kind of took John Porter, which all of us political scientists had to read, and turned it on its tail, or on its end, to consider gender. She also decided to decenter Queen's history by writing a book about Jean Royce and about the really pivotal role that this woman behind the scenes as university registrar played in many people's lives to make Queen's work. And she taught for many years in the Queen's sociology department, and her undergraduate and graduate students adored her. She is a dedicated advocate today of basic income, and on both the local committee and on the national committee about this. And in my humble opinion, Roberta Hamilton is always the best strategist in the room. So try and have her on your committee if you need something to happen. Roberta.
Two things first. This is the first time in 30 to 35 years that I have written something that didn't go by my in-house editor. And second, I will tell one story today. Yesterday, I checked it out with my former colleague and friend, Mary Morton, who confirmed it. I was the first coordinator of women's studies, but to understand how that happened and how little I had to do with it, I look at the intersection between biography, history, and money. My arrival at Queen's, as Margaret has said, and as Elizabeth has also enlarged on, came in the midst of a great deal of feminist activity. One success was Principal Deutsch's decision to strike a permanent principals advisory committee on the status of women. Sociology professor Kathleen Herman was vocal in that campaign. And afterwards, the principal was heard to ask, "Is Ms. Herman satisfied?" She loved the question, never answered it, but those of us who knew her never imagined for a minute that Ms. Herman was satisfied. My late friend, Suzanne Mackenzie, then a doctoral fellow in geography, told me about a group to further women's studies who met in Professor Elizabeth Green's living room, where they supervised the baby in the group, her son, Alan. Probably the biggest obstacle to entrenching women's studies at Queen's, other than sheer disbelief, if not outrage that such a thing was actually a thing, was money. My situation played a role in the resolution. No dean wants to start a new program because it means taking positions away from an existing department. Women's Studies was up against this immovable obstacle, but there was a lot of agitation, and increasingly professors were joining the ranks. What was a dean to do? At that time, Queen's launched the rather presumptuously named Queen's National Scholars Program. Essentially, these were bridging appointments funded by the university, not the faculties, to retirements in departments that were successful in the competition. The sociology department met to look at the applicants, including mine. Mary Morton knew the score. She was serving as academic colleague to the principal, and more than that, probably of all those involved in the campaign for women's studies, Mary had the most political savvy. She told her colleagues on the appointments committee that the department would only have a chance at a QNS if it nominated me. The dean had figured a way out of his conundrum. If I was named a QNS, he could appoint me as the first coordinator of women's studies, and the faculty wouldn't have to spend a dime. The sociology department couldn't fuss because I was an extra. Sometimes we're not in the right place at the right time, and we mistakenly blame ourselves. Other times we're in the right place at the right time, and we may mistakenly take the credit. I was very fortunate. My 3 years as coordinator, supported by Terry Sheen and women faculty from across the university, were among my most rewarding. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Roberta. I just keep taking notes because you all keep saying more that I want as part of our history. And then Roberta convinced Terry Eastersheen to join her in this new adventure, and Terry stayed for 35 years to take up that adventure. But as well as dedicated staff, Terry played a leadership role in the local queer and arts community, and she still does. She's been a longtime member of the Real Out collective. She's been a longtime member of the Women's Art Festival, the Kingston Pride Committee. She's played a leadership role in unionizing staff and played a vocal role even before the union to make sure staff's interests were acknowledged, which they weren't often. And she was the emotional glue of the department, as I said in my little talk, that you know, I don't know anyone who hasn't cried at some point in Terry's office. I just don't. And she's always been the department's biggest cheerleader. And so now we have the Terry Eastersheen Graduate Award, which we're very excited and we've launched, and we're going to send you information about it later so that you can also help enhance our department and our graduate students' ability to study here by supporting the Terry Eastersheen Graduate Award. So with all that, Terry, it's your turn.
Whoa, thank you, Margaret. This is a very emotional day for me, as many of you can imagine, it wasn't only the tears of other faculty and staff and students, they were often my tears. And so I really got back as much as I gave, and thank you. And thank you to everyone for participating today. And I wish I could see all the faces of the attendees because I miss everyone so much. But wow, 35 years. It is surreal to me. That's a big chunk of my life. And, you know, going into work every day, it didn't feel like work. It was a home away from home, and there were many challenges. And I was learning so much every single day from all of you, from all the faculty, the cross-appointed faculty, the adjunct faculty, the students, and the graduate students. And so I am truly, truly grateful to all of you for teaching me how to be an activist. And I mean, I really didn't know, but I believe so much in what you all have done and continue to do as a way in which to change the world. So having said that, I really just hope everyone is staying safe, and I hope that you are continuing the fight, and it still is a fight. I wish I could say that many of the things that people are experiencing now was a thing of the past, and it just isn't. But I want everyone to continue the fight, and I'll be right along there with you. So I hope everyone has an amazing summer, a productive, a very healthy and safe summer. And I really hope to bump into all of you. I'm fortunate enough to bump into Elizabeth quite a bit, and it's always such a joy to run into her. And I have one very special thanks, and that is to not only to all of the department heads, the co-cos, but to Roberta Hamilton, who asked me to join this amazing adventure. And wow, I had no idea it would be a 35-year adventure. And so I'm indebted to Roberta Hamilton. So thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Terry. Oh my goodness. All right. Last but not least is Bev Baines, who became co-coordinator with Roberta Lamb of Gender Studies in 1991. And then she agreed to become head of the department again. You know, she's the only one who's agreed to do it twice, which says something about Bev. We owe her big time. She's been a faculty member and associate dean of the Queen's Law School. She was a feminist constitutional consultant to the Canadian Advisory Council on the Status of Women in the 1980s around the charter debates. She has edited 2 books on women constitutional law. You can hear her every now and then on the CBC commenting on various gender and constitutional issues. And I don't even know if Bev knows this, but those of us in the department would call Bev the Bulldog, but we said that we meant it endearingly because we knew that Bev always had our backs. And when she went to the deanery, we knew she was going to move mountains in order to try and get us another hire. And she wouldn't take no for an answer. So Bev, we are so glad that you can be part of this today too.
Thank you, everyone, for inviting me to share this celebration. No, I didn't know about the bulldog, but I like bulldogs. And I had a saying that Terry will remember: nothing ventured, nothing gained. So in my trip down memory lane, I remember 2 very audacious events in 1985. So as you have already heard, one involved the collective audacity of many women faculty and students and staff demanding and producing the first women's studies course. The other audacity was litigiously oriented because the charter right to sex equality came into effect in 1985. At last, women had the constitutional right to challenge governments that had passed discriminatory laws. As a law prof, I had great hoax for the charter right to sex equality. On the other hand, in 1985 and 86, I was not quite sure what I envisioned for women's studies, never mind for my role in women's studies. What a difference 35 years makes. The charter right to sex equality has been a big disappointment. Women who took their sex equality cases to the Supreme Court lost until 3 years ago, when that's like 35 years again, when women finally won their first sex equality case about pay equity. Their win was a loss for the government that claimed pay equity was not about sex equality. In 2020, when women won their second sex equality case, it was a loss for the government that claimed job sharing was not, this was after maternity leave, was not about sex equality. In other words, our governments are naysayers. They are not sympathetic to women's sex equality claims. Compare women's and gender studies at Queen's. There's no way to be disappointed about moving from a single course in 1985-86 to a minor, medial, and major degree program, and ultimately to a department that offers graduate studies. In the context of the university, this progression is a big deal. And it was accomplished predominantly by audacious women for audacious women. Just as contemporary governments deny women equality, so too do contemporary institutions, including universities. And we've heard and seen a lot about that today. In legal and educational contexts, women and their sympathizers must be audacious. But take a women's studies course, listen to a women's studies graduate, live in the shoes of a women's studies activist, and decide for yourself which is more audacious. The charter right to sex equality, that disappointing charter right, or a women's and gender studies education. I leave it to you to be audacious.
We will try our best to be audacious, Bev. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, all of you panelists who we asked you to squeeze so much into such little time. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate you and your contributions that you've made and that you are here before us today. It really, it means an awful lot. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to call on Elaine Powers to do the next introduction.
Oh my goodness, here's to audacious women and the audacious women who started women's studies at Queen's. This has been fantastic, and we still have more fantastic to come. So I'm really happy to see everyone sticking with us, because we still have a number of things coming up. And the first is a video from another former student, an alumni, Carla Moore. And Carla holds an MA from Queen's Gender Studies, and she describes herself as an artist, activist, academic, alchemist. And there's much more we could say about Carla, but I think you'll understand that description once you see her video.
The thing this girl didn't know is that the type of Black you become depends largely on where you become Black. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about my experience of becoming Black, which might seem counterintuitive because I've always had this pigment, but just go with me. I hope that you'll get it. So there's a couple different types of Black you can be. The type of Black I started out as, but I wasn't really aware of it, is boom, bye, bye, Black. But then there's also Wagwan Bloods, Black, Black Lives Matter, Black, polite Black, slightly less polite Black. And we never had slavery here, Black. And I became Black here. at Queen's University sometime between like 2011 and 2013 as I was studying for my MA in Gender Studies. Now, becoming Black at Queen's was equal parts, oh girl, this is nice, and I don't like that. I don't like that. Marching through the streets at Take Back the Night rallies, being pushed off the sidewalk by students who didn't see you coming, despite the fact that you are close to 200 pounds. Don't ask me on which side. Okay, it's my business. Mind your business. Radical anti-oppression consciousness, which is something that was fostered by the department. I never thought about anti-oppression thinking as a whole before I came here, and it's really changed my life. But also microaggressions everywhere you turn. You might notice that every time I'm outside and I'm bundled up, looks like it's cold, there's a certain je ne sais quoi on my face, because I don't really like the cold. And of course, if you're from Queens, then iconic Halloween costumes. Doing my MA at Queen's Department of Gender Studies, it unsettled me. It really forced me to interrogate myself, my life, my ways of thinking and being in a way that I never had before. It forced me to reimagine myself. It reintroduced me to myself. I came to Queens as a Jamaican, just bam, obviously. And I left, obviously still Jamaican, but as a different being, unapologetic, radical, revolutionary, ready to do the work and actually equipped to do the work. This is me on the day that I defended my thesis. And Catherine Mckittrick's hair is the reason I became Black. That here is a thing that called me to Gender Studies. That here on the department's website is the thing that made me feel this could be a safe space for me. And then, the department and my friends that I made in Kingston and Catherine nurtured me, supported me, and got me through. But before all of that, it was this here. And now I'm here. It was complicated. I am not going to lie. Kingston is a really weird place to be a Black person, but I wouldn't be who I am without the whole experience, the being rubbed raw by some of the racism that I experienced just going about my life, and the being nurtured and energized and radicalized by the work at the department. It's given me a level of clarity about my life's purpose that I know for sure I wouldn't have otherwise. And it's also given me some great friends. So I'm grateful. Happy anniversary to the department, and love to everybody who is here. And as always, keep fire burning.
Wow, keep the fire burning. Thank you so much, Carla. That was so fantastic. We could probably spend, another day or two featuring the creative works of our amazing students and former students. That was just a little taste, and I'm so grateful to them for their contributions. And Carla's video, of course, was a fantastic segue into our next speaker, Catherine Mckittrick. Catherine is Professor of Gender Studies and cross-appointed to the Departments of Geography and Cultural Studies. She authored Demonic Grounds, Black Women and the Cartographies of Struggle, and edited and contributed to the volume Sylvia Winter on Being Human as Praxis. Her monograph, Dear Science and Other Stories, published just a few months ago, is an exploration of Black methodologies. She is currently working on two projects. The first, unnamed, attends to questions of extraction in the work of Black studies theorists. The second, Pastel Blue, studies color, color theory, image making, and Black aesthetics. Welcome, Catherine.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Danita and Mel and Elaine and Scott for organizing us and making this happen. I just have a little, I'm going to call it a story to share with you. And I'll try not to go over I have right here, just so you know, that's why I'm looking there. I have like my timer. not to go over my 5 minutes. I began working in gender studies and women's studies at Queen's in 2004 as a contractually limited appointment. And at the time I was in the final months of a postdoc in geography at York University. And the postdoc had given me time to complete my first book manuscript, which was a version of my dissertation. The appointment at Queen's provided solid grounding in teaching in the field of women's studies and how to work out how my doctoral work could be expressed pedagogically. The first course I taught at Queen's was called International Women, and my best student was Grace Oganyankin, who is recently hired as a QNS in Black Geographies at Queen's, and I am over the moon. The position led to a tenure track position a year or so later, and I was tasked to teach a range of courses in the program, many courses in fields and topics that I was unfamiliar with, which led to a few long years of reading and rereading and rethinking how to stretch my own archive. I noticed recently when looking back at my old lectures that my first lecture in International Women was a summary of Sylvia Wynter's 1492, A New World View. So I arrived with a plan, one that I'm still carrying out. As we know, women's studies and gender studies are fraught disciplines and areas of study. They have been dominated by mostly white feminists with an eye on liberalism. That is the feminist project of inclusion into patriarchy or equality with patriarchy. Women's studies and gender studies have been haunted by this legacy, but we have not always lived that legacy, at least not at Queen's. But I arrived in the wake of departures by scholars, the departures of scholars like Alyssa Trotz and Bonita Lawrence, who left because of anti-Blackness, who left because of anti-indigeneity at the departmental level and at the university level, as well as their experiences with racism and racial violence in the wider Kingston community. I and we also witnessed the fight to keep the category of woman as the definitive symbol of the department, while also observing the student push to eradicate femininity altogether from the department. This was expressed in the name change from women to gender, with the hopes that we would foster queer, trans, and gender nonconforming scholarship and attract scholars who were committed to fighting for better futures across gender identifications and across racial identifications. And then the MA, and then the PhD. Thank you, Scott Morganson. This is while being called a Black mascot, the diversity hire, the affirmative action hire, the Negro, the Black studies bitch, the never here commuter, the Black scholar who is replaceable because they all do the same thing. This inside and outside by non-Black colleagues, students, staff across the university. Imagine the teaching evaluations with the word we are not allowed to speak out loud, but students find a way to write in large block letters on your teaching evaluations. This while Bev Baines allowed me to teach anything I want, no questions asked. Here's my show and tell of what I taught in masculinities, which is the Motley Crue autobiography. Actually, let me just take another second here, if you're not familiar with the Crew. This while Bev Baines allowed me to teach anything I want, no questions asked. This while Terry Easter Sheen made me the best mushroom soup I have ever had. This while hanging and having a cig with Heather McKend. This having dinner with Margaret Little after I think I won the 5-year bet. I'm not sure, she'll have to remind me. I won the 5-year bet that the name change did go through, or it didn't go through in the time frame that we had decided on. We thought gender studies will never happen, or it will never happen in the next 5 years, and then it didn't happen in the next 5 years, and so Margaret bought me dinner. That's what it was. And there are more stories, more difficult stories. Gender studies and women's studies, and the category of woman is fraught. If you know me and you know my world, you know that these tensions not only illuminate negativity, they provide the conditions to imagine new intellectual and creative worlds. Yasmin Djirbel, Yani Ali, Milka Nourish, Erin Abudram, Jasmine Abdahali, Darcel Bolin, Laura Quack, Lisa James, Kemi King, Carla Moore, Daniel Houghton, Erica Ibrahim, Catherine Masrick, Kendall Wittizik, Alicia Williams, Elliot June, Marshall Hill, Renee Whitaker, Kay Ann Williams, Muna Dahir, Celia Romales, Maya Stitsky, Dana Wesley, Kara Melton. These students, I suppose, and others are why I am still here. These are students who dreamt that Black studies is possible in this anxious and terrifying landscape that is full of potential. The university, my interlocutors remind us, is porous. It is awful and colonial, but it is porous and incomplete and a location of radical possibility. Women's studies and gender studies foster that possibility, a possibility that is underwritten by friendships and hard work and activism, a possibility that notices how the awfulness, the coloniality, is a site of struggle that faculty, staff, and students collectively participate in. I'm so appreciative of the students, faculty, and staff who have helped build Black studies at Queen's. I'm especially appreciative of Sammy King and Stephanie Simpson, who walked into many meetings with me when I was and still am the only Black person in the room. I appreciate them attending those meetings with me. Gender studies and Black studies together provide a moment of relief for those of us, Black and non-Black, who are fighting for liberation. If you know anything about the Parachute Club, you know that that video was based on Caravana. So I end with noticing and sharing with you that Rise Up and the Parachute Club is a way to think Black studies, pride, queerness, and gender studies all at once. Thank you.
Aning, Sega, Medawalain, Deluisi Bonita Lords, Migamach Nanin, Enkage Delawek Shitiak. Hi there. I was at the Institute of Women's Studies for 5 years. My name is Bonita Lords.
Hi, my name is Melissa Hotaling.
My name is Heather Castleton. I'm coming at you from the Department of Geography and Planning, but I have had the honor of being the grad chair in gender studies this past year.
Hello, my name is Monique Harbison, and I am a graduate from the 2013 cohort of the Gender Studies Master's Program at Queen's.
Hi, everybody. I'm Arzu Singh. I was part of the Gender Studies MA cohort of 2014. Since graduating from Gender Studies at Queen's, I went on to do my PhD at U of T at the Women and Gender Studies Institute.
Hi, I'm Angie. I was also part of the MA cohort of 2014 at Queen's, and I am also doing my PhD at U of T in Gender Studies.
Hi all, my name's Dan Venna, and I was actually the cohort of 2013. I'm currently an adjunct instructor in the Film and Media Department at Queen's University, and I ended up getting my PhD in Cultural Studies also at Queen's.
Hello, everyone. My name is Terry Easter Sheen, and for 35 years, I was the administrative assistant and eventually the graduate assistant in the Department of Women's Studies, Gender Studies.
My name is Grace Adeniyi Oguyankin, and I'm currently an assistant professor in the Departments of Gender Studies and Geography and Planning at Queen's University.
Hi, and happy 35th anniversary, Queen's Department of Gender Studies, from all of us at the Real Out Arts Project, home to Kingston's LGBTQ Film Festival.
I was the chair of the wonderful, dynamic Women's Studies Subcommittee in 1983 to 1985.
This is the first Women's Studies course. It was held in 1985. So you see, it's not just 18-year-old students. It was lots of people from the community. There were 100 students enrolled. There were about 30 others who audited. And then there were all kinds of community people who came and sat in the back of the room. It was a place that we could find some replacement of family.
I've made such amazing friendships and relationships with a lot of friends and colleagues. It was such a great foundation for making those connections with people that I collaborate and respect and admire to date.
We are deeply grateful for the found family Gender Studies gave us.
Coming into Kingston and meeting people like Dan and Arzu and forming these sort of deep, lasting friendships and relationships, and ones that nourish me emotionally, nourish me academically, nourish me soulfully. That it's been an incredibly important part of my work going forward, but also just in feeling like connected and settled and like I have these enduring relationships that are going to guide and nourish me through my life. And the Queen's program was a big part in bringing that to me.
Without any doubt, we would not be going into our 23rd year now without the guidance and support from faculty, staff, and the teaching fellows from gender studies over the years.
Just letting you know how much I miss you all and how much I enjoyed and had the sheer privilege of working in such an incredibly vibrant and intellectually stimulating department, comprised of smart, kind, compassionate, and politically engaged faculty and students. I've really learned so much from all of you, and I will be eternally grateful for that.
So I took Women's 212, which I think was called Gender, Colonialism, Resistance, and Women's 330, which was Gender and the Global South. And those two courses just completely changed my life. They changed my life in terms of the course content and the professors. Women's 212 was taught by Dina Georges, and Women's 330 was taught by Catherine Mckittrick. And I think the two of them were the first women of color professors I've ever had. And I'm grateful that that I was able to take courses like that during undergrad. Courses that, that allowed me to think outside the box, courses that pushed my thinking and various critical lenses that I could use to understand certain things, to analyze certain things.
I am entirely grateful to all that the beginning founders of women's studies, gender studies did to create a program and to create that course. So it really did ripple and have a big impact on a lot of people. So I want to thank everybody for that.
Thank you for the immensely positive impact that having the opportunity to be a part of this program and learn from so many incredible scholars has had on my own life, both personally and professionally.
It has been such an amazing time for me to get to know all of the community in the department, the staff, the amazing staff, the faculty, and the grad students. It's been one of the highlights of my last 7 years at Queen's University. And I know it's been a difficult year for everybody with the global pandemic, but it's really remarkable to see how this community cares for each other and supports each other.
I taught Introduction to Women's Studies, race, class, and gender. I developed a course in Indigenous literature. And for a couple of years, I was also seconded to the Development Studies department when they created an Introduction to Indigenous Studies course. And when I joined the Institute of Women's Studies, I was one of 4 Indigenous faculty in the university at the time. So I think I spent as much time at 4 Directions Aboriginal Student Services sometimes as I did at the Institute, because teaching hand drumming, helping with ceremonies, helping with the students, etc. But the Institute of Women's Studies was my first academic home. And it's where I learned how to be a professor. When I left Queen's to go to York, I was surprised how deeply the place had affected me. I'd kind of grown into it, if you like. So thank you very much. I'm Sid Nogamak, all my relations.
And Melissa and I would like to offer our congratulations on this 35th anniversary and to say thank you to the organizers and innovators who started the program in 1985, to the many who have sustained the program over the years, and to those who are now carrying its innovative and important work forward.
We want to say thank you to the many department heads, our fellow faculty, and the administrative staff we've worked with over the years.
On behalf of the Bannery Foundation Board of Directors and Bannery Center staff, we would like to extend our congratulations to Gender Studies on the occasion of its 35th anniversary.
I'd like to congratulate Gender Studies
on their 35th anniversary.
Congratulations, Gender Studies, on getting to this milestone. Hard to believe.
I look forward to being part of this growth now, and I'm excited to see what gender studies will look like in the next decade or two, or even more.
Congratulations to Women in Gender Studies and happy 35th anniversary.
It's so hard to believe that we're 35 years old and that this is a big anniversary for the department.
It's the Department of Gender Studies 35th anniversary. Congratulations, Gender Studies!
Congratulations to all the members of the Women's Studies, Gender Studies community. For 35 years, you've been making Queens, Kingston, and Canada a better place.
Happy 35 years, Gender Studies. You don't look a day over 30.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for everyone who contributed. I think you've had a little taste of 35 years, especially big thanks to the founders who had the audacity to start this in motion. I don't know if I'll still be here in 35 years, but it would be kind of exciting to see what happens in the next 35. We're at the end of the formal program, so we're going to take a 5-minute break. And if you'd like to come back after that, you just have to log back in. We're going to end this this Zoom session. So then when we come back, everybody can be on camera and have the mic, to have an open mic session. So we'll take a 5-minute break. And then if you want to come back, please just log in using the link, the original link. It will work, and there'll be time for some informal conversation. And Margaret is going to host that.
Yes, I was just going to say, go get yourself a glass of wine or something and then meet us back here.